WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. I'm wearing my Costas In shirt because we're going to be over there celebrating, continuing our 25th anniversary here. But more than that, it's the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. It's back out on the road. It's all presented by our friends at the Maryland Lottery. We have some Raven scratch-offs to give away. We had some lucky winners at Coco's, and we're going to be at Fadley's this week. We're going to be at Pappas and Parkville next week. We're going to be all over the place, including at Gertrude's, celebrating the holidays a little later on in the month with Dan Rodrigues. Our friends at Win Donation, also 866-9-DONATION. You buy two, you get two free all month long through the holidays. And Jiffy Lube, Multi-Care, oil up, and stop by there, get your oil. I got my little reminder the other day when the orange light went on. I have been knee-deep into this stadium thing. Luke and I are doing football. The Ravens are doing great. There's all that. The Orioles are going to maybe sign some players, maybe not. But the biggest story in the city to me, and if you've been listening to me, you know this, is the stadium lease that doesn't just involve the Orioles. It involves the Ravens. The Ravens aren't the ones beating on the door asking for money. Steve Bisciotti will benefit. The next ownership would benefit from any of this. This guy covers all of this treachery and filth. His site is called Field of Schemes. And no, it's not Halloween season around here, but some of this civic information and what's going on in other places, colleges, states, municipalities, sludgery that we learn about later on. He is, I don't know how many years. Neil deMause, how many years have you been? And I'd like to know the tipping point of when you got into this business of documenting the civic ripoff that sports has been trying to pull off the last 30 years here in America.
That would have been 1906. I think it's actually, let's see, been 28 years if you go back to the very first article that Joanna Kagan and I first started researching, that before it turned into the book and the website.
What made that happen? What dirty deal was it? You're going back 28 years, so I'm thinking I'm just doing the math on this. 95 or PSL? Was PSL a part of this?
It was, there were two things, and it had a lot to do with the fact that I'm from New York and Joanna's from Cleveland.
Arthur B. Modell was in the middle of this, huh?
Yeah, we were both working at a little zine in Brooklyn at the time. And Rudy Giuliani, man, you may remember, was trying to get a new stadium for the Yankees. It was going to be in Manhattan at the time.
Always a guy on the up and up, as we learned later in life.
At the same time that he was slashing library budgets. And in Cleveland, right, you had Modell taking the Browns out of town, and you had Cleveland putting up money for a new stadium to get a new Browns expansion team at the same time that the city schools were in receivership. And Joanna and I were like, oh, this will be a fun little 1,000-word story. Look, two cities where it's going on at the same time. And somewhere in the middle of our research, we, one of us called the other and said, I just had an hour-and-a-half conversation with a state assembly person from Wisconsin. And the other said, I just got a 72-page fax from Seattle. And we're like, maybe this is a slightly bigger story than just Cleveland and New York. So it was off to the races, and I haven't been able to escape this story. I have to say, at the time, we're talking late 1995. I really thought, wow, this is a sort of, we're catching this weird moment, right? When cities are throwing all this money at sports stadiums. Really, got to strike while the iron is hot and write a book about this. We could have saved our time because any time over the next 28 years, it has not changed one iota. And if anything, just the numbers are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, as we're seeing right now.
Well, if there is a team, okay, if there's a team there, football, baseball, basketball, hockey, some shenanigans have gone on. I mean, one way or another, civically, because none of this ever really gets paid for privately. It's, it's social welfare for billionaires. And then, but it's happening here for the third time in my life, right? So I'm 55. Okay. So when I was a little boy, we lost the Bullets, right? And the arena wasn't any good. We never got a hockey team. I'm watching the Clippers, and then we're watching Memorial Stadium sort of rot away. And we're like, Daddy, why does Doug DeCinces and Don Baylor play for the California Angels? Daddy, what happened with Reggie Jackson? He was here for 5 minutes. Why is he a Yankee? And then also, why does Jim Palmer stay? And then as a 10, 12-year-old kid with baseball, I learned about free agency and a strike when I was 12, 13 years old. Then I'm 15. And this drunk, batshit football owner takes my dad's football team in the Mayflowers to
Yep.
Indianapolis. And then I got a job at the newspaper. I was at the newspaper at that time. I was 15 years old, 16 years old, working at the paper with John Stedman when all this happened. So if you wonder why I got born into this or why 32 years later after doing radio, I'm still talking about it, but this is the first time in a long time that I'm an adult talking about it, because when I was in my 20s, it was give Baltimore the ball. Let's get Boogie Wineglass. Let's get the Glazer brothers. Let's find somebody to bring a team here. And it turned out to be Art Modell and all of Herb Belgrad's crab cakes when you were coming into this. But it's been 30 years now. We have these two stadia. They've been maintained by the Maryland Stadium Authority. And what is your understanding from the outside of what's happening here? Because I feel like you're on the forefront of trying. This is a big story, but it's not the only story. They're not building stadiums here. They're just giving money to owners as though they're going to rebuild stadiums. It's $1.2 billion, a lot of money.
Yeah, I was going to say Baltimore really is kind of ground zero, or part of the origin story of all this, right? And the Mayflower vans are the start of chapter 1 of the book, because they, this really is kind of what got the ball rolling in the late '80s. Was the response to the Colts leaving, and then Camden Yards, and the way that happened. There were some others, right? There was Skydo in Toronto. There was the Chicago White Sox. There was, it wasn't only just one stadium that made a change. But then what we're seeing now, right, is that all those teams that got stadiums in the '90s are starting to come back for new stadiums, like the Braves did and like the Rangers did, or for renovations, right? So you've got the Orioles, you've got the Brewers, you've got who else is trying to get renovations right now? Royals are talking about a new stadium.
Well, they got Tampa and Oakland. They got to, in Vegas. They got to
Sure.
figure out to begin with, right?
Sure. But I'm just saying that it's like, this is the thing right now is, Cleveland has come back time and again, for renovation money. And
they have a crane in the middle of third base right now in Cleveland baseball. Yeah.
So this is absolutely the move, right? It's been 20 to 30 years. We can start saying, hey, this place is getting old. I mean, this stadiums used to last 70, 80 years, no problem. Nobody thought of it as an issue, unless, they needed something that was going to be more multi-purpose and work for both, baseball and football or something. But now, it's gone down to 40 years to 30 years to 20 years. Suddenly a stadium is considered, starting to show its age. The fact that you're talking about the Orioles coming back for potentially around $1 billion in subsidies when you count all of the cash and tax breaks and free land, things like that, then that, which is, I forget what the state price tag was on Camden Yards. It was like under 200, right? I think.
It was less than $200 million project.
Yeah, so we're talking
and the
about,
football stadium was less than 300 at the time.
Right. So we're talking about, even if you take into account inflation, easily like triple or quadruple, right? What was put into it in the first place. And this just seems to be the MO, right? Is it's not about what you need. It's as a team owner, it's not about what the stadium needs in terms of upgrades. It's what you think you can get away with. And as the dollar figures keep going up, we saw last year the Buffalo Bills set a new, standard with $1 billion in subsidies. And I think everybody at that point looked around and said, oh, we've only been asking for $500,000. We should be asking for closer to $1 billion, because that's the price that cities and states are willing to pay now. Again, I've seen these numbers just soar over the last year, to where nobody asked for less than $500 million now, because that would just be chump change. Whereas, again, 30 years ago, even in 1995 dollars, people were asking for not nowhere near that.
Neil deMause is our guest. He is Field of Schemes. What is your professional background? I asked you the same question I asked Tom Kelso last week from the Maryland Stadium Authority. Like, what got you into this other than being a guy writing about it, being a, I don't know, civic watchdog, stadium watchdog, sports watchdog, billionaire watchdog, which is what I think of you from the outside, but I'm not familiar with what you do the rest of the day besides Field of Schemes, Neil.
That was it. It's sports fan and journalist interested in city issues and how why the cities spend on one thing and not another. I came into this not knowing really anything about stadiums other than that the Yankees had threatened to move to New Jersey at one point. And both Joanna and I had to really sort of learn from the ground up and be like, oh, let's take a look and see what economists say about which deals are better than others. And we would call economists and they would say, oh, that's easy. They're all terrible, right? None of these pay off. Then we would be like, let's see, whether cities are just approving these deals because the populace is demanding it, right? Because they're afraid to lose their team, right? That's the message that's out there is, right? If you're a mayor, the worst thing possible is to lose your team. And then we would go and see the people who are actually, if anything, fighting against it. And we're like, we don't want to, we already paid good money for tickets. We don't want to spend our tax dollars on a stadium too.
Well, Westmore's a little boxed in here because
still, I forget if I told you this before, but to date, there's still only one mayor who lost his job after a team left, which was the mayor of Seattle when the Sonics left. And when I've talked to people in Seattle, they're like, yeah, that didn't help. But really, it was because it snowed right before the election and he didn't shovel the streets.
Oh, well, yeah. It's always potholes. Yep. Westmore's an interesting spot here. He has this relationship with the baseball owner, but more than that, to your point, it's like, how much is enough? Yeah. They went to the legislature. They got them $1.2 billion, sort of rubber stamped under the guise, the more of the legislature I talked to, saying, we thought it was outrageous then, but we kind of went along with it, just saying, okay, it'll be done with. And there's a lot of interesting things, and Tom Kelso has educated me and others have educated me along the way, that part of the new verbiage for the Maryland Stadium Authority that the Ravens agreed to, and the Orioles kicked the can because they wanted the new governor and the buddy deal, the bigger, better deal for John Angelos, was that the parity clause exists. So whatever one gets, the other one will get, right? But the notion that you want to break up the Maryland Stadium Authority, that you want control of the money. And Neil, I'm old enough to remember, and I get barky about this because I'm 55 now. I was, 25 when the stadium opened and it all went down. And I was in my teens working at the paper, covering all of this every night of my life. I wasn't reading the newspaper. I was putting it out every night. I was editing it every night. So I knew everything that was going on that reporters were telling me before I even went on the radio in 92. But the notion that Camden Yards would change our city, that it would be an investment in tourism, the economy, hotels, restaurants, getting people white flight back into the city, like all of that, it all worked in 92 and 93. It even worked after the strike in 95. It stopped working when a really bad human bought the baseball team and really served to destroy it. And I did 30 ballparks in 30 days in 15. I've been in I finally made it to the new Texas ballpark a couple weeks ago when the Orioles were playing down in Arlington. I've been to all of them. I've been to all of them many times in many cases. And Camden Yards was the real deal. That if we had a baseball team like the Cardinals or the Red Sox or just a competitive team, the Tigers, just a team that's been competitive over 30 years and hasn't lost 100 games a dozen times, that it would have been a bigger economic engine. And this is a different story because Washington, the Washington situation, we were Washington's team when the stadium was built and drank in on all of that. And Peter it was forced upon Peter. Peter never wanted to agree to any of it, still hasn't paid for any of it, quite frankly, even though he's usurped the cable bill for 17 years. But the situation has changed so dramatically here for the mojo for the team. There's a football team in the parking lot that's won 2 championships. The baseball team, everyone hates the ownership here, right? So it's not just giving money to Mike Brown or giving money to a rich guy or whatever. This is giving money to the Angelos family, who has just been awful upon awful upon awful at a time when they won 100 games this year and still couldn't sell tickets. But more than that, disbanding the Maryland Stadium Authority and giving power and money, all of this money literally to the owners with no oversight, should be frightening to people. And I'll throw it to you with this after my soliloquy. I keep wondering who's got the idea. This isn't about the land or the money or the casino or what's really going to bring people there besides we're going to win every year, because that's bullshit, because they gave me that in 1992. And when you don't win, nobody comes. And then blame it on crime, politics, all the Freddie Gray stuff. I mean, this is a book here in Baltimore as to what's happened over 30 years with feelings about Brooks Robinson and Cal Ripken to what it is at this point. But this notion of power and the land and what I'm going to make money on the land, you better have an idea that brings people, because I don't see the idea. You know what I mean? I wouldn't mind asking for the money if we had someone brilliant saying we're going to build something that's going to help people, but there's never an idea, right? It's just the money, and we'll come up with the idea later.
Okay, a bunch of answers there, right? Okay,
Sure.
first of all, totally agree with you on John Angelos, but we have to remember that if anybody's a baseball fan and has looked around the league and has looked around the crop of billionaires who own teams, there are a lot of really bad people who are owners, right? You know, so this is not just an Orioles situation, right? There are plenty of people in plenty of cities who are right now looking at their owners and saying, you know, they're terrible, either just horrible people, you know, horrible at running the team, horrible at, you know, I mean,
Hard to support. How
it's
about that?
yeah,
Yes.
no, there's definitely, and that's always, you know, I used to
I
watch
grew up with Charlie
Steinbrenner from
Finley.
up close, right? You know, I
Right,
mean,
yeah,
like I remember my friends going and getting on the front page of the sports section for holding up signs that spelled out "Fire George" in the bleachers, right? So, you know, long tradition that's getting worse of, you know, douches owning sports teams. Okay, so that's one. Second of all, when you mentioned I just want to say that when you mentioned the parity clause, this is not unique again. The same thing happened with the Yankees and the Mets, right? The Mets basically had a deal when the Yankees and the Mets both wanted new stadiums that they would get from the city whatever the Yankees got. So they just backed off and said, "Okay, Yankees, you go." The Yankees arranged their deal, and the parity was such that the Yankees were getting a whole bunch of different things, but one of them was about $300 million to like build a new park to replace the one that was being demolished to make way for the new stadium. And people in the Bronx were without a park at all for several years. It was horrible. But the Mets were just building the parking lot, so they didn't need to build a new park. So instead, to have parity, they got, oh, we used to share our parking revenues with the city, and it was like, I don't know how many millions of dollars a year. We're just not going to do that anymore in the new lease. That okay? Sure, that's fine. So they got that
Well,
just
they both got this in the new lease here.
piggyback.
When Billy Joel comes to town, the city
Yep.
makes nothing. Nobody
Yep.
makes
And I remember
because
that. Yeah.
so they've already given away Taylor Swift and given
Yep.
away Billy Joel, right?
So this is
Literally.
very common, is what I'm saying, right? Is that you have two teams, and one team will be the one to carry the water and be like, "We're going to push for this," and then the other team will say, "Okay, us too." Same thing's going to happen in Kansas
Well,
City.
Steve
Right?
Bisciotti doesn't have to do anything.
The Chiefs are going to.
He's got
Yeah.
a guy from Venable,
Yep.
his
I know
law
what you're saying.
firm, running the Maryland Stadium Authority,
But
dealing with John, and whatever
right.
John gets, Steve just gets it.
Right, which is going to be very interesting when John gets a whole bunch of development rights to the warehouse and things like that, right? Because what's parity for that? Third thing I want to mention is just not let it go, right? You said they got the $1.2 billion from the state. Let's remember that's at least $1.2 billion, because that's $1.2 billion in bond capacity, which means if they sell $1.2 billion in bonds and they start paying off the bonds, let's say they've paid off half of it, that's another $600 million that they can go and sell new bonds. So this is potentially.
Well, part of the activator was a 15-year lease activator that anytime the team would ask for money and say, I need a new deck, I need a new left field, I need a new scoreboard. Hey, we got you covered, but you're now on for the next 15 years. So
sure, and you do get something back,
but makes the team never leave.
But it's still right. But I mean, the team doesn't want to leave if they're going to get $1.2 billion every 15 years.
Well,
right?
that's what's up on the scoreboard.
Each, right?
Keeping the Orioles here as long as the American flag is flying over the harbor.
For a while, there was, I remember, man, this was probably like 15 years ago. The owner of the Saints, right, the New Orleans Saints, had been asking for money for stadium upgrades to the Superdome for years, and then he finally was just like, "How about instead of that, you just pay me to play there?" And so for a while, he had a lease where he paid negative rent, and the city just paid him to play in his home stadium. And I almost feel like that's more honest, right? Because that's really what we're getting to at this point with these constant demands for more and more money. Is if you want a team, you just have to pay in tax money for the privilege of it, which is nuts, right? Because if you think about it, the team needs the city more than the city needs the team, right? Baltimore will continue to exist would continue to exist without the Orioles. Baltimore did continue to exist without the Colts, but you have to have a place to play, right? If all the cities in America and North America said, well, no, we're not going to play this game, then the teams would have to just fold because, right, they can't just say, well, we're just going to go play on a barge in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So the last question you asked, right, is what would actually change the Orioles situation, right, in terms of selling tickets, in terms of being able to keep their players, things like that. And there's always, team owners always say, well, if we just get this money, then we'll be able to.
That was Masson. Like Peter was, hey, I want all of that DC media revenue money. That's mine. That's my area. So we can beat the Yankees and the Reds. No,
and that
did not work out that way.
That is not the way that economics works, right? It's not the way running a business works, right? If you get a whole bunch more money, you don't necessarily suddenly think, oh, I have more money, I am going to go and spend, say, another $100 million on players, unless you think you're going to get $100 million back in new sales, right? And realistically, for Baltimore or really any team in the league that's not maybe the Yankees or the Dodgers or maybe a couple of others, right? If you have a better team, you're going to sell a few more tickets. I'm sure the Orioles will do much better at the box office next year than they did this year, right? Because suddenly it's a team that, it didn't help to get knocked out of the playoffs, but at least people have been a little bit excited about it, and there's like a little bit of a sense of like, okay, maybe if we go next year, they won't lose 100 games, right? But that doesn't mean you're suddenly going to be able to sell, an extra million, $100 tickets if you spend $100 million on more players. So you'd be stupid as an owner to do that, and then it's. The teams in smaller markets are always, as long as you have the baseball situation where the teams in the big markets control the media revenue, basically, right?
San Diego would be.
It's not, baseball is not football, but football is very different. Everybody shares all that Fox money, right? And the ESPN money, and every team has, whether you play in New York or Green Bay, you have pretty much the same money coming in. Baseball's extremely different because not only do you sell more tickets if you're the Yankees than the Orioles. And by the way, I do want to mention when George Steinbrenner was trying to get a new stadium, one of the things he argued was that the Yankees would never be able to compete with the Orioles if they did not have one. I swear to God, it was in the newspaper. But the
only time in life George wanted something that Peter had. It was always I wrote a book on the other side. Peter just he wanted to be George so bad.
But they all use it.
He wanted to be in Seinfeld.
It's all got to keep up with the Joneses, right? We have to have this because the guy down the road has this. So I just really think that. Where you're in a situation where it's not going to move the needle. Anytime an owner says, I will go out and go on a spending spree if I just get a new stadium, it's not going to happen. Or if it does happen, it'll be like what the Marlins did, right? Do you remember what happened when the Marlins got their new stadium? They went out and they signed Jose Reyes, they signed Mike Burley, they signed a whole slew of people. And by May, the team wasn't like 20 games in first place. And Jeffrey Loria was like, okay, this isn't working. And the next winter, he traded everybody. And they've been, the same old fire sale Marlins ever since. And I think, definitely changes need to be made in baseball to make sure that teams like the Marlins and the Orioles, don't get torn apart every few years. And so that you can actually buy an Adley Rutschman jersey and feel like it's going to last you more than, a handful of years. But that's separate from building stadiums, especially because right? That if the Orioles get $1 billion worth of subsidies for upgrading their stadium, the Steinbrenners are going to say, well, our stadium's almost 20 years old. The Orioles got all this money to upgrade theirs. We can't possibly compete with the Orioles unless we get money, and they're going to come back to New York for more. So it's just an endless cycle where cities all lose and taxpayers all lose and the team owners all win.
In our next episode with Neil deMause, we'll describe our top 5 all-time heists. Marlins better be in there, by the way. I mean, if you've watched them all, right? That's a top 5, right?
100%.
Yeah, I follow along. Field of Schemes is the way to do it. This is the last thing because I was interruptive with
Sure.
you, but like the San Diego situation, and I mean that was the dirtiest of dirty. Lucchino was out there, a part of it. They stopped construction. Mayors got thrown away. Like all sorts of things happened there. They lost their football team inevitably because of that, right? If that would have gone better. But the modern Padres they got Machado, they've got the players. They went and spent. That was a build it and they'll come. We got to compete with our Yankees, which is the Dodgers up the road. They even beat them last year in the playoffs, which tastes nice. Now they're broke, right? Like, and I don't know if it's real broke or not broke. That's for you to figure out. But borrowing money sounds broke, and no media chain at all. I mean, the television model and the media model and the BAM model and the Masson model, the RSN model, it's gone. That's at the heart of all of this. This is John thinking, bet, like Barney Rubble, bet. Like at some point, something's going to need to fund this besides Ollie's Bargain Basement Night and $8 tickets, and fans that couldn't even afford $100 playoff tickets, let alone had they gone another round or 2 or 3. I mean, Neil, my wife and I pulled 2 tickets up for the American League Championship Series, $890, and I looked at it, and I'm like, nah, and I'm not the only nah. I think in a lot of these places, even there's a price limit for all of this, for sponsorships, for everything. And San Diego's the one place that was like everybody else that stuck their foot out over the ledge a little bit and said, we're going to act like we're a big guy. And this is going to be a case scenario for John Angelos saying, we're not going to do what they did in San Diego, go broke. But how broke are they? Can I just ask you that?
I mean, it's always hard to say, right? Like whether they're really broke or whether they're just. I mean, it's certainly a little scary right now, and they spent like crazy, and I think they'll probably end up just retrenching and not signing a whole bunch of guys and dumping salary
Fire
and
sale,
doing all the
another
thing
one.
that the teams always do, right? But that's kind of baseball, right? Is one of the things about it is, again, like other sports, it's not like basketball, right? Where you can just go sign the 3 best players and suddenly you win a championship. And especially now, right? Where, as we all just found out, right, when you've got 12 teams in the playoffs, right? Even winning 100 games doesn't guarantee you anything, right? So you have to be both smart and lucky. And the Padres were probably not smart in that they spent a whole lot of money, but they made some horrible trades. Go and look someday at who they gave up in like the Austin Nola trade. It was just so many terrible trades. And then they didn't get lucky, right? They made the playoffs last year and then they lost. And then this year, a whole lot of things went wrong. They managed to stumble into the worst possible situation. Although as a Mets fan, I feel like we were always in the worst possible situation. But yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely. Sorry, there was a second part to your question. In addition to
just what the picking up the pieces of when it's not working and there's no revenue and you're borrowing money to make payroll, like that's 1973 baseball to me. That shouldn't be where they are in 2023. And that's about Manfred to some degree, right?
Everybody in baseball at this point is rich enough that they can afford to dig into their savings account and pay for things if they want to, right? It's more about like, well, okay, we tried that, it's not working. We'll try not spending money now and see if that does better. And honestly, years ago when I was writing for Baseball Prospectus, I did a little study where I was like, let's see which teams are doing the best at spending money, who's getting the best return on their investment, right? And can you guess which team had the best ROI in terms of how much money it was spending? Basically you take like what
Tampa Rays.
This was it was not the Rays. I think the Rays probably did pretty well. It was the Florida Marlins at the time, because they were getting the best number of wins per dollar because they were spending nothing and they were winning like 80 games, which isn't great, but it's certainly better than, and especially again, now that you've got 12 teams in the playoffs. And this is one of the things that I think that the Players Union is very concerned about, and why they may start pushing back on the expanded playoffs, is they're realizing that teams are going to look and say, the Marlins made the playoffs this year. A little luck, they could have gone to the World Series, right? Look who else went to the World Series, right? So maybe instead of spending big, we should be thinking, let's just try to spend just enough to win 85 games, maybe 90 games, right? Neither team in the World Series won 90 games this year. Am I correct about that? Yeah.
Correct.
I think one won 90, one won 89. Neither one more than 90. So try and win 90 games, just spend just barely enough and hope that you get lucky in October. And it's a rational strategy. And I think the players are right to be concerned about it. And I think as fans, everyone should be right to be concerned about it, right? Because you don't want someone like Don Angelos thinking, you know what? We won 100 games. That was overkill. We didn't need to do that. That didn't help us any in October. If somebody leaves, as long as we're still somewhat competitive, sure, that's fine. Then we'll roll the dice.
Or as Mike Flanagan said to me before the tragedy, back when he was running the team, Andy McPhail's line was, "Why feed him steak when they'll eat hamburger?" Neil deMause joins us here. He is Field of Schemes. Please go read his work and read the lurid history of money and billionaires and things that are going on, sort of like what's going on here. I got my eye on the prize. We're going to be out doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. Neil, I'll tell you what, man, I'll trade you a LaFreitas up there, maybe some Nathan's fries one day at a Metsy game in exchange for a crab cake. We get you down here, all right, sometime soon. I've been wanting to redo that Orioles Mets thing ever since '69.
I was hoping we'd meet in the World Series this year, but it didn't work out.
Yeah, we almost didn't, there was some guy, Swoboda, we almost didn't let him back in. I mean, I don't think he ever was allowed a crab cake after that. He is Neil deMause. Please go find him. You can find me. Luke's out in Owings Mills. We're around here and keeping our eye on the prize of your money, our taxpayer money, and how much of it John Angelos is going to get. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. Oh, by the way, there's a parity clause, so that means how much Steve Bisciotti is going to get too, because I can't blame one without the other. We never stop talking Baltimore positive, except when it's not positive.